last week saw the culmination of years of hard work by politicians, gamers and the industry to make changes and amendments to the Australian Classification Bill.
Well, I think it's just common sense. We've got an R18 category for movies. We need one for games as well. Australia is the only Western country in the world that doesn't have an R18 category for games. Now we do. My first game was Donkey Kong when I was 10 years old. I remember the old Commodore 64. The games I played 30 years ago are a bit different to the games that are played now. But you've got a lot of politicians here in Canberra that play games. 90% of homes have got computer games in them. So just like the people in homes all around the country, politicians play computer games as well. So we get it. We understand that this is a pretty common sense reform.
Just do what you have to do.
I always do, Sam. I always do.
The average age of gamers in Australia is in the low 30s. When these guidelines were first put in 1995, I was 12 years old. Now I'm nearly 30. And these are the sorts of games that I want to play. I want to play games that challenge me, that confront me.
This isn't gonna work. You're not hearing me.
In 1993, Night Trap horrified Senator Margaret Reynolds, sparking her to launch a campaign to restrict access to mature video games. A year later, the National Classifications Act was passed. All video games for sale in Australia would now require a classification from G up to MA15+. The first proposed amendment to the Act to include an R18 classification for adults was in 2002. So why then did it take so long?
The way the classification system works to get it changed in Australia is each state and territory has to agree unanimously to change it. So that's 8 different people with different opinions, different moral codes coming together and saying, yes, I think we need an R18 rating for games.
You have to help me, please.
And also, of course, there was a lot of change in Parliament. So we had Michael Atkinson, who was the South Australian Attorney General, who was very opposed to R18.
No one may leave the city by order of the Inquisitor.
And at that time, during his tenure, he was the only minister who didn't want to vote for R18. And obviously, it couldn't pass without his approval.
Pretty much as soon as he stepped down, I think everything started to escalate. That was around the time of the public submission that the federal government had put out, which received, I think it was 60,000 responses, was staggeringly in favour of an R18 rating. I think 98% in favour of an R18 rating. So this was obviously an issue that had really resonated with, sort of gamers in Australia.
And around the same time, we saw real activity about talking about the issue, but much more in depth. Why is it important? What does an R18 mean? What does an absence of it mean? I think there was a great collision at that time between the media really taking an interest. The consumers changed their view as well. Then we had some, website activity, different blogs were going, and I think it was just that perfect collision of all of us at the same time reaching a conclusion that it's about time we took a nice concerted effort.
This is one of the interesting things about the debates that you have in Canberra. Normally there's people strongly in favour of something and some people that are strongly against the sort of laws we want to put through the Parliament. This is one of those debates where both sides of politics agreed. And I think the reason they agreed was because we had so many people from across the country that were campaigning for this. When 98% of people tell you this is the right thing to do, I think most politicians realise it's a smart thing to do.
Finally, it begins.
From the 1st of January, I expect that a lot of gaming companies will put games forward for classification, and then it's up to the classification board to do that work quickly so that we can get games onto the shelves. If there's a game that's been refused classification in the past, it's allowed to be reconsidered for classification again 2 years after it's been refused classification. An important point to make here is that we're still going to have a refused classification category, just like you have for movies that you might want to see.
Tonight, Papa's Palace of Pain.
Now that the federal government has agreed on the R18 amendment, it's still up to each individual state and territory to decide how they want to implement and enforce it. And while we're all celebrating this landmark decision, we do need to understand that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
While all states and territories seem to be on board with R18. We have heard in the past that South Australia, for example, is planning to or is thinking about abolishing the MA15 plus category, which will create a really big problem for how games are imported and sold and distributed in South Australia. So if you think about it, having an MA15 plus across the board in every single state and territory except South Australia is going to create a little bit of a problem for the industries.
It's really just a decision that South Australia would have to make. We've passed the law to create the R18 plus category, and my department here in Canberra has got a role in monitoring that and also making sure that it's all rolled out nice and smoothly between now and the 1st of January next year.
I think the amount of time that this has actually taken to come through the Senate has resulted in people meeting the news with a bit of cynicism. So now that there have to be complementary legislation put through the state parliaments, people are sort of, they're expecting that to go wrong. They're expecting something to go wrong there.
I think it's just a matter of getting it done. Canberra has already passed the legislation. A lot of other states have it in various states. So it's really a matter of just getting this thing done and getting it all done in time.
Extraction complete.
Now that the R18 issue is out of the way, what it allows us to do is focus on probably a much bigger issue or a series of issues. So now we can focus on, what needs to be classified in the future? How do we classify it? Is online and offline the same? There's a whole number of classification questions that really need deep examination and lots of thought. And we're looking forward to now having that conversation with other stakeholders and with the government.
We had the Australian Law Reform Commission have a look at our classification system. It hasn't been overhauled really for about 15 years, and they've come back to me with about 57 recommendations on things we can do to update our classification system, reflect the fact that we're in the 21st century now, not the 20th century, and I'm having a good look at that, so stay tuned, there might be more on the way.
It just feels like a really cool victory for common sense, firstly, but also it's sort of a testament to what gamers can do as a collective if they really focus on one specific issue and focus their energies towards something. It sort of feels like a little bit of an achievement unlocked for gamers, I think. R18 rating, 1 million gamer points.